My name is Jono. I am a senior technical threat intelligence analyst within the kind of wider PwC cyber team. I love these introduction slides, not because, well, I'm not really relevant. Like, you can read everything there is to know about me on this slide, but I like taking these opportunities to talk about my team, because without them, I wouldn't be standing up here today. They didn't save my life, but they did allow me to kind of go into a field completely by accident. I can't really get into it now, but I confused the word instant response for international relations on a job application and actually ended up in TI just completely by accident. So I really shouldn't be here, but thanks to the PwC team, and thank you to the VB team as well for selecting this talk. I'm super humbled and very, very grateful. And I guess when I think about what really interests me about TI and what really makes me excited about doing research is being able to tell a story. Most of the malware that's analyzed by the PwC team, and I'm sure by CTI analysts in this room, it's not boring, but it's really hard to tell a story about it. You end up having to kind of debug, stay in IDA, go back to the debugger. It's not sexy, it's not cool. But this is a story of a threat actor that actually has like a really cool story. And it's pretty much the only reason that I put it in for a request for proposal is because I like it, I think it's cool. But I'm also burdened with having to tell the story. I have 30 minutes to tell the story of a threat actor that we spent 8 to 9 months analyzing, that sucks. Like, I would like to spend longer, but I'm using this agenda as a way to kind of help me more than you summarize this activity and present to you basically our research over the last, well, just under a year. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about a highly likely China-based threat actor. Now, I don't love the diamond model all the time, but in this instance, it's actually really helpful because we have a really concrete idea of what and who Red Dev 26 actually is. As I said, it's highly likely a China-based threat actor. They have a very, very specific tool set. And this will be quite significant later on in the presentation when it comes to attribution. Not that attribution always matters, but in this case, it's kind of contested. The toolset that we're talking about is a DLL loader that we call shelf loader, and that leads into a final stage payload, which is kind of like a reverse shell. It looks a little bit like Meterpreter, but it's a fairly standard reverse shell. It has upload, download, file, write, read capabilities. It also has very specific victimologies. We're talking South China Sea countries, or rather entities based in countries within the South China Sea, as well as the East China Sea too, more recently. There is infrastructure overlap between campaigns, or at least in the earlier campaigns. Recently, we've seen a turn towards more less shared infrastructure and more one-by-one campaign basis. However, some of the victims which aren't related to the campaign appear on multiple IPs. So again, if someone could help me answer that question, that'd be awesome, because I don't know why that is. But with the kind of introduction of the threat actor out the way, it is time to talk about, well, how we got here, because it's always interesting for me as an analyst to hear how people start analyzing activity. And this is also a great opportunity for me to shout out one of my best colleagues and a close friend, John Southworth, Bits of Binary on Twitter, who basically passed me this because he had too much to do. And eventually we ended up expanding this into the threat actor that it is today. But essentially, I was given this sample from February 2022, which was targeting well, it looked to be targeting the ASEAN conference that was going on in the same month. And I looked in our threat intelligence repository and portal and saw that we'd actually seen similar ASEAN targeting back when there was a previous summit in May 2021. I by chance looked at the DLL of that report in May 2021 and found that actually, and I don't know if you can see it on the screen all the way in the back because I've struggled all day, but these two DLLs, they're different, but they are very, very similar. Similar enough that I was like, okay, bit weird. I should probably keep investigating this. Now, this is where stuff kind of gets complicated because in May 2021, the IP that was used was attributed in open source to APT41 or barium. Yeah, barium. And then this activity in February 22 was attributed to Mustang Panda or Bronze President. Both of those are China-based threat actors with their own bespoke TTPs. Now, I fell victim to APT41, well, not me, I wasn't hacked by APT41, but I fell victim to the victimology kind of trap of APT41. And I actually said in our first report, it could actually be APT41 based on the infrastructure. When that report came out in February 2022, it actually came out that the IP that was used in that campaign that was attributed to APT41 was downgraded. So actually, I was left calling it APT41 without any evidence, which that sucked. But it led me to think, if I can find two DLLs that are very similar, that are almost a year apart, they're about 9 months apart, that look very similar, that do exactly the same thing, what else can I investigate? And so I made like a very brief Yara rule. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't cool, but it did get me to a sample from January 2021. So we're still in February 2022, having made that ASEAN report. However, I am now looking at a binary from January 2022, so the month preceding. And then after that, I said, oh, okay, right, well, we've got quite a lot here. I should probably do some more work on this threat actor. And I did. And we found 17 other binaries, one of which is from 2019, and the rest are from 2021. And I will say that most of this analysis was not done through malware analysis. I did very little RE at this point. It was just spray and pray Yara at some of the strings and some of the malware and hope that it actually works, and it did. So we ended up with, again, I hope you can see this. Red is not a good color in light, but in 2019, we see one binary. We don't see any until 2021, a very specific event in 2021. And then the threat actor just continues to ramp up activity. Let me just check the time. Continues to ramp up activity all the way into 2022. All the way, in fact, up to August 2022 was the last binary that I've seen with this threat actor. It seems to me, at least, that from 2021 onwards, we see a specific goal in mind when they're targeting, whereas in 2019, well, they're not using the reverse shell in 2019, they're using Cobalt Strike, so the operations are a bit less clear. And that makes me think, and I have to be very careful because in threat intelligence, we often use assessment confidence, or confidence assessments, I should say. In fact, we always use confidence assessments. And I'm gonna have to not use that right now, so forgive me, TI gods, for doing what I'm about to do. There is no activity between no observable activity between 2019 and 2021. Between the years 2019 and 2021, we see a kind of shift in code base, and we'll see that when we come on to the changes in the binary, but ultimately what we see is actually the threat actor makes the binary less clean in 2021 than they do in 2019. In addition, they stop using Cobalt Strike, and they start using this reverse shell that I will kind of talk about in technical detail in a little bit, which makes me think. We have clustered all of this under Red Dev 26 just by virtue of the fact malware and infrastructure and victimology, because there is overlap across all three, which is good enough for me. But it is possible that actually, as we know, China-based threat actors do love to share code, and there is overlap across multiple threat actors. And I think about shared malware, Shadowpad, PlugX, Poison Ivy, et cetera, et cetera. All of those malwares have been shared across multiple threat actors. It could be that actually Red Dev 26 doesn't start out as Red Dev 26, starts out as another threat actor, and what we're clustering as Red Dev 26 is actually another threat actor reusing code base from a previous generation of malware. But who knows? It's not my, well, it is my job, but I don't know that part. So this is what happened when I actually mapped it out. Now, I will say full disclosure, I did what I thought was a really nice graph of all the DLLs. Nobody in my team agreed with me, so we ended up with this as a compromise. So this is all the raw archives that I have seen related to Red Dev 26 activity. As you can see, Myanmar starts off as being a really big target. Now, again, there are a couple of caveats, or rather cool little tidbits that I actually have time to mention. You can see, oh, I'm going to use the laser. All in one, this thing here, you can see a 2019 timestamp. That's wrong. The threat actor, realistic probability as far as I'm aware, what they do is they take the actual legitimate all-in-one font, which is a font package for, that was on the president of Myanmar's website. They repackaged it with their own DLL. Now, I don't know whether they put it back inside the actual legitimate place in the president of Myanmar's website, but in VT, the ITW URL is that link. So I don't know, make of that what you will, but either way, the threat actor uses or repurposes a legitimate zip package for their own ends, which I thought was pretty interesting. And then we kind of see this like cluster, and then we see this one here. This is interesting for pretty much an unrelated reason, but I'm so glad I could actually segue into it now. This zip includes a Word document, which is related to an article made by, ooh, you're really testing my preparation skills now, made by an Asian news outlet, and I can't remember the name of them, but I'm sure I could, after this talk, like directly after it, I'll remember it. The article was made in 26th of April, 2022, and the original early modifications of the document was April 26th, 2022. But the latest modification was the 5th of May, which is exactly the same as the zip. I speculated, or I made an assessment, a confidence assessment with a realistic probability that actually the threat actor had poised to target whoever they were tasked to target. They took the original translation of the document, which was English, and then they translated it badly into whichever language they needed to for the target. And in this case, it was Burmese, which is the official language of Myanmar. One also really interesting thing to note before I'm on time, it's fine. One interesting thing to note here is this is where we see Red Dev 26 start up operations again, which is actually February 2nd, 2022, or at least the DLL is compiled February 2022. In the 1st of February 2022, that's when the Myanmar coup starts. So we see a very specific date of a geopolitical event followed by Red Dev 26 activity, and that is followed up again. The Philippines, there is a lot of discussion around the relationship between Duterte, or Rodrigo Duterte, who's Philippines president, and Xi Jinping, or the CCP in general, around their relationship and the pivot back towards the United States. Well, we see three pretty distinct Philippine targeting of Philippine-based entities throughout the November into December into early 2022 kind of nexus. And then we have some random, well, I say random, there are ASEAN events going on, but it's not as cool as Myanmar or the Philippines in terms of like consistent targeting, but we see clearly Red Dev 26 has a motivation when it comes to kind of targeting of entities. And then we have Thailand, this is roughly when discussions begin about, are there going to be shared exercises between Thailand and the PLA, which took place in August 25th of 2022, which is great. So we've kind of mapped out the threat actor. What do they actually do? How do they actually operate? Well, this is an overview. I don't really know how much I want to kind of go over this, but essentially, we are fairly certain, realistic probability to highly likely confident that the threat actor uses spear phishing as an initial access method. I say that because we know that most of the campaigns that we have observed use either Dropbox or a G Drive link, which you would click on and the payload would arrive on your system in downloads. It doesn't execute automatically, which leads me to assess that the threat actor has to convince or coerce the victim into targeting or clicking on the link. And we'll see in a little bit that they do some methods to try and encourage that, and that includes very kind of bog standard things, which include using a PDF logo for an executable or hiding the DLL on the system, all that good stuff. Basically doing as much as possible to kind of hide operations. That leads into what we'd call shelf loader, which is loaded via a benign executable, which then downloads in memory a payload, which is kind of like a second stager, which calls to a C2. That C2 downloads a load of shellcode, which is then RC4 decrypted and a 9-byte XOR key decrypted, or decoded, sorry, into the actual command or the reverse shell payload. This is shelf loader. If you ever get given the binary, and I will say full disclosure that I will be putting our YARA rules for this threat actor and their binaries on our public GitHub probably tomorrow when I put the slides in, but it will be up, I promise it will be up. This is the function I want people to focus on. It's the kind of where the resource sits, and we'll talk a little bit about how the threat actor does this, or the techniques that they use to change over time, because it wasn't always this way. They have improved their techniques over time and changed some things, and that's cool, because we like stories in threat intel. We like the ability to see not hands-on keyboard level stuff, but the ability where to see whether the threat actor has made choices, cognizant choices. And some of these choices are really cool. So I'm not kind of prefacing my whole presentation, but there is some cool stuff coming that isn't just this. You can see here how the malware pulls the next stage payload from the C2. So again, I don't know if you can see this, but I'm going to use the laser pointer again. So you have the first 6 bytes, which are actually a fake TLS header, and it's a way for the malware to kind of spoof network traffic. And then you have these 3 bytes, 170303 and a hex, which the malware will check for just to make sure that actually this is the right payload, that's what we're looking at. These 9 bytes in total are the RC4 decrypted, or not the RC4, the 9 byte XOR that's used after the RC4. The RC4 and 9 byte XOR never change from 2021 all the way up to now. They don't change. If you're watching this Red Dead 26, please don't change. We've really enjoyed having not had to work all that hard after rewriting one of them. But that's essentially shelf loader. It's between BPF door and Crimson Rat from Transparent Tribe. It's about somewhere in the middle of complexity. But the next stage functionality is a little bit, not trickier, it's just more interesting. The threat actor uses a double pointer structure. So what they do is, as you can see here, they basically make a structure of APIs or D words to APIs that they call. And then they'll use a separate structure, which you can kind of see here. They'll use a separate structure to call that structure. And that's how they load APIs into their command shell. And you can kind of see the functionality of the command shell. They've even included plain text strings, which is really nice of them. But you follow the functions, and you can get the functionality that you need. There is an interesting victim from August 2022. We assessed that the victim has uploaded the shelf loader binary. They've also uploaded 2 other files alongside with it. One of them is a Golang backdoor. It seems to be bespoke. I haven't analyzed it enough yet. Alongside a kind of a networking protocol, like open source GitHub executable, which again, more work needs to be done on that, but maybe you'll see me here again next year to talk about it. But we assessed that there are more payloads after this. This is just kind of the beachhead for them to kind of start doing what they actually want to be doing. And we know the payload works. It makes sense to me that they haven't altered all that much, because they have victims. We've seen in the NetFlow victims beaconing out to the C2 IPs of the malware, so we know it works, and we assessed that there isn't enough information in open source for them to actually have to change anything, so this is why it is what it is. So we can talk a little bit now about the changes made. Some of them are more fun than others, and some of them can be perceived to be a bit more superficial than others, but they are nevertheless interesting. I am, again, very sorry if you cannot read these slides. They seem really clear when I look at them at a laptop, but when you're at the back of the room, it's a lot more tricky. But I've kind of tried to use black boxes to make it a little bit easier. So you can see here that the threat actor decides initially, weirdly, to go for just the executable. They hide the DLL in the system, and you can easily unhide it, but if you don't have that, if you don't untick it, as it is defaulted, you won't ever see it. And then, weirdly, so this is from 2021, and this is from February 2022. I don't know why they've decided to do this thing again, where they've added the DLL back in. I assess it's because it's called acrobat.dll, and because this has an Acrobat logo, they assume that the target believes they need acrobat.dll. No idea, but that's an interesting change. I have seen them now go back to the method of not only having a DLL and a .exe, but also an extended resource, which is the Word document that is loaded to the target as a benign kind of, hey, it's all fine, when it's not really. And then, again, some of these changes make no sense to me, but they are changes, so I have to mention them. This is a binary. This is from 2019. The threat actor has 2 exports. And then they go for this method of having up to 302. There is this one really weird binary that, again, if people want to do more research on, I would highly recommend doing it, and then tell me how you did it, because there is one binary that is a bit of an outlier in the rest. It has, so usually there are about 20 to 35 exports. Sometimes they spoof legitimate DLL exports, but in this individual case, they had 302, and the sample runs nothing like I'd expect from shelf loader. So there is, again, more work to be done there. Is it that there is another actor using this code base? No idea, but it's interesting, and that's cool. We like interesting. We like more research to be done. I have nothing more to say about that, except for the fact that you will see, when you look at Shelf Loader, the threat actor becomes more aggressive in their naming of exports. I'm not going to use the swear word, but there is like a consistent swear word they use for their DLLs, or their exports rather, which is interesting. It seems to me, and we'll talk about this actually in the next couple of slides, that over time, the threat actor starts making these really weird choices for their binaries. And this is stuff that doesn't impact the functionality. It doesn't change the way the malware functions or operates. It is literally just for the analyst to see. So we start off here with using font support as an open event. It's fairly benign. However, in 2019, there was none of this. They actually used none of this. They didn't create an event. They didn't do any of this. There was no storage size for int. There was none of this. It was just very plain, and we'll see it in the next slide. It was very, very efficient in its code base. So we already begin to see in 2021 the threat actor start to go, I can probably get away with this. We then start to go into a bit weird territory with like, I work in JP, new line, calling the create event MTV USA, which again, I don't know how many people have an MTV application on their laptop, but to call an event MTV USA makes no sense to me. And then I still don't know what Bryce Team 11 is. The rest of the shout outs, if you will, on from Red Dev 26 malware makes sense to me. This one doesn't. So if anyone after this talk has any indication of what Bryce Team 11 is, more than happy to hear that. Then we get into the really weird territory where like, my dream is to make money to support my touch, okay? And I'm a programmer that lives at the bottom. Again, it's just printf. It doesn't do anything. It is literally just for the developer. I don't really understand, again, why. Then we see stuff like this. Haifei Li, who is he's actually on Twitter. He's a kind of reverse engineer malware analyst. Don't know who he works for, but hi, if you're watching. We also saw Moto Sato was also copied in as a create event as well, who is also a researcher who works in Japan. And this is where things get really interesting because this is April to May 2022. AU, UA, RUS is Mustang Panda, yes. I mentioned before that Mustang Panda was mentioned in attribution. It was never put in open source outside of some VT rules that hit in the community section of VT. The only way you would ever know that Mustang Panda had been attributed would be if you had a VT account and you could see the comments. Now, in May 2022, after this binary was posted, a threat intel outlet did a report that aligned Red Dev 26 with Mustang Panda. I do understand why they've done that because there is some overlap in the benign executables, but at PwC, we just haven't done that yet. And again, I will talk about this in the takeaways. Attribution is fine as long as you are confident with talking about why you attribute X as Y, whether that be with external third parties or within your own internal team. It does not matter how you attribute as long as you're just doing it with confidence and with some form of evidence. But this is weird, and I thought this was very strange. They begin to get more sweary and a bit more. It's clear by April 2022 they know they're being watched, or they know that they're being analyzed. And yet they still don't change any of the malware. They don't change anything, just the strings within the binary, which I found to be relatively, interesting. It's not even useful. It's just interesting. And that's what threat intel is all about, really. This is the less superficial stuff, the stuff that I found to be quite significant. I actually said earlier that they don't change their code base. They actually do change their code base. So you can see here, this is the 2019 binary. You can see how clean it is. There's no extra strings, there's no extra faff or fluff. It is just virtual alloc, do some memory, virtual protect, run it. And here we have do persistence mechanisms, then do some virtual alloc, and then do create thread. So we already see some changes, but not, I would say, in an efficient way. It's just bad, or at least inefficient. I shouldn't say bad because it works. Just inefficient. And then the threat actor really changes things up because they stop using create thread and they stop using the start address as a way to pivot into their newly formed DLL. What they do is they use APIs that have callback functions. So gray string W is one, if you've ever heard of it. It just bitmaps, like it grays out a bitmap area. And enum date formats A. So what you do is you just basically use a callback function within the API to load the resource. It's not clever, but it is interesting, and it threw me for about 10 seconds where I was like, where's create thread? I'm lost. So I found enum date formats A and said, oh, okay, fair enough, cool. Also, the way that the malware loads the APIs is interesting too. Not the APIs, the resource. You can see here, this is the technique the threat actor uses for about 10 months from 2021, from 2019, actually it's 2 years, isn't it? 2019 all the way to May 2021, where they have a resource that's a big clump in memory and then they just unwind it using an algorithm. And here is what they do from about September 2021, all the way to now, where they put the resource in these functions, and there are about, you'd see a chain of about 30, 35 functions that have these encoded resources that are then put inside this function here, that are then unwound and appended to each other to eventually end up with the final stage kind of loader that calls the C2 that loads the command shell, the reverse shell. Which is interesting. They also use these like weird keys. Sometimes it's just as simple as being like an MD5 hash of a key, and sometimes it's Larry W cash $6. Again, threat actor's choice, not mine. And so I'm coming to the end, and I guess what I wanted from the end bit was what we found useful as a TI team. Espionage takes a long time to understand, and ransomware as a service operators too, having done research into darkside and black matter. It takes a while to understand what the threat actor is all about, and sometimes you won't have any idea. Sometimes you're left with speculation, which isn't intelligence, it's just speculation. And it's fun, but it shouldn't go in reports as confidence assessment. So I would always advise threat intel outlets to take time analyzing stuff, and that includes RE, like scrub it clean, get as much done as possible, really know the opcodes in and out. And with that comes the bottom point. Let's see if I can coolly point that. Yeah, documentation. Like even if you're not writing a report on a malware, document it. And I am so guilty of this. I don't document anything if I'm not I used to not document stuff if I wasn't reporting on it. I would just kind of have it in my brain and go, yeah, if that comes up, I'll absolutely remember it. I never do. So please, when you analyze, document, because your team, when they pick it up, will remember or rather have something to go off and won't have to start from base 0. And then finally, be comfortable with attribution. Like, it's all good. It's not that you can get things wrong, but you can have competing hypotheses with other intel outlets or even within team members. As long as you know why you attribute X as Y, and it isn't ridiculous, then that's cool. And that is actually everything I want to say. So thank you so much, guys. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Jono. We have time for 1 or 2 questions. Are there any questions? Or you all want to get a cup of tea or coffee? Okay, well, in that case, well, thank you for your presentation, and please join me in thanking Jono.